You know, it's amazing to me how the culinary world never sits still, right? Like there's always something new happening, some new trend.
Always something new, yeah.
But right now, at this sort of intersection point of like, really old traditions and all the exciting stuff going on in modern kitchens, there's sourdough baking.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think it seems almost magical, right? How do you just take flour and water and end up with something so complex and so delicious?
I know.
And in this deep dive, what we really want to do is like cut through all the noise and give you a solid understanding of sourdough starters.
Yes.
Because that really is the heart of it all, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. We're going to dive right into that core component, the sourdough starter. It's really the bedrock of any really good sourdough.
Mm-hmm.
And it's incredible, like you said, when you think about how simple it is at its base, it's just flour and water.
Right.
But within those two humble ingredients, there's this whole fascinating kind of hidden world of wild yeasts and bacteria,
Yeah.
And we're going to unpack the essence of what makes that so unique.
So you're listening to this and you really want to learn, you want to like build a really solid foundation of knowledge about this without getting bogged down in a million details.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what we're aiming for here.
For sure.
This is like your express train to sourdough starter understanding.
And our mission, I think, is pretty clear cut here. We want to like unlock those secrets behind cultivating a really thriving sourdough starter.
Yeah.
So we're going to trace back its origins. We'll get into the really intriguing science that powers it.
Right.
And then lay out the essential practical steps that you need to know.
Okay, so let's just get right into it. Where does the story of sourdough even begin? Because it feels so traditional, right? But it must go way, way back.
Way back. Oh, yeah, for sure. The history of sourdough is incredibly long.
Yeah.
We're talking thousands of years back to ancient Egypt.
Wow.
And there's archaeological evidence that suggests that leavened bread, most likely, an early form of sourdough, was discovered just through natural fermentation. Can you imagine, like, forgetting about a batch of dough, leaving it exposed to the air, and all those wild yeasts and bacteria doing their work?
Yeah.
And boom, you've got this lighter, tastier bread.
Yeah.
That was likely the very first leavening that humans ever knew.
Ancient Egypt. So we're talking like from the pyramids
Exactly.
to the perfect loaf.
Yeah.
That is quite the lineage.
It is.
And then, moving forward in time, I remember reading about sourdough being like a huge deal during the American Gold Rush.
Yes, you're totally right.
Oh.
So let's fast forward from ancient Egypt to the mid-1800s in California during the Gold Rush.
Okay.
Sourdough played a critical role for those prospectors and miners.
Yeah.
Their sourdough starter wasn't just for baking bread.
Right.
It was like an essential part of their sustenance and their survival out there.
Yeah.
And that's actually where the nickname sourdoughs for those prospectors came from.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. And that whole era really solidified sourdough's place in American baking history, especially in San Francisco.
Well, of course. I mean, it's almost like you can't picture one without the other.
They go hand in hand, right?
And this leads us so perfectly to some of the key people who really shaped sourdough's story.
Yeah.
Like Isidore Boudin.
Oh, Isidore Boudin, a legend.
Yeah.
He founded Boudin Bakery in San Francisco way back in 1849.
Wow.
And what's so amazing is that their original sourdough recipe from that time is still being used today.
Wow.
Think about that, like a direct connection to baking history in every loaf.
Yeah, that's some serious longevity for a recipe.
It is.
And Boudin Bakery, you can't underestimate how important they were in making sourdough popular all across the U.S.
Absolutely, they're pioneers.
And then, looking at more modern times, we've got people like Chad Robertson from Tartine Bakery.
Oh, yeah?
And he's really become an icon, hasn't he?
He has. He really has. Chad Robertson has pretty much reshaped modern sourdough baking. His methods are so meticulous.
Right.
He really dives deep into the nuances of fermentation, how the dough is handled. And he's inspired a whole new generation of bakers to explore and experiment.
Yeah.
He's shown that even with such an old craft, there's still so much room for innovation.
So we've got this amazing history, right? And these are really influential people. But what is it about sourdough itself that makes it so special?
Right.
What's the science behind it all? That's what I'm really curious about.
Okay, well, this is where it gets really, really cool.
Okay.
Every sourdough starter is totally unique.
Really?
Think of it like your own personal microbial signature.
Wow.
It's shaped by so many different factors. The environment where it's created and lives, the specific mix of wild yeasts and bacteria that are in the air, in your kitchen, in your flour.
Wow.
Even the baker's touch can influence it.
No way.
Yeah, and that's why you get such an insane variety of flavors and textures. in sourdough bread. It's a
Mm.
real aha moment when you realize you're not just following a recipe, you're actually cultivating a living ecosystem.
So you're saying that, like, even if I had the same flour and water as someone across the country,
Yes.
my starter would end up completely different.
Absolutely. Your starter would evolve in its own unique way because of all those factors we talked about.
That is mind-blowing.
It is, and the magic of sourdough fermentation goes beyond just making the bread rise.
Okay.
It actually makes the bread more digestible too. The long fermentation process allows enzymes to break down the gluten,
Mm-hmm.
which can be really helpful for some people, and it also boosts the nutritional value
Wow.
by making certain minerals easier for our bodies to absorb.
Interesting.
So it's not just about taste and texture, there are actual health benefits too.
Yeah.
And think about those lactic acid bacteria we mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
They're similar to the good bacteria you find in yogurt. They contribute to that lovely, tangy flavor.
Right.
And they also act as a natural preservative for the bread.
So we've got this incredible history, a really unique scientific process going on.
Yeah.
Now, let's say someone's listening to this and they're like, okay, I want to try this. I want to make my own starter. What's the timeline? What are the key steps to bringing this, like, living culture to life?
All right, let's break down that cultivation process for you step by step.
Awesome.
So day one, you start by mixing equal parts of your flour and water in a clean glass jar.
Okay.
Give it a good stir. Cover the jar loosely to let air in, and then put it somewhere warm in your kitchen. That warmth will get those wild yeasts and bacteria excited and ready to work.
Simple enough. Just flour, water, a jar, a little warmth.
Exactly. And then you wait and watch.
Okay, what happens next?
Okay, so on days 2 and 3, you'll start to see little bubbles in the mixture.
Okay.
That's a sign that fermentation is happening. Now, here's the thing. You need to discard about half of the mixture
Oh.
and then feed it with fresh equal parts of flour and water.
So why do you have to throw half of it away? It seems kind of counterintuitive.
I know it can feel a bit wasteful at first,
Yeah.
but trust me, it's super important. You're basically replenishing the food supply for the microbes you want to grow. And you're also managing the acidity levels in the starter. It's all about creating the ideal environment for a healthy, strong starter.
So you're, like, concentrating the good stuff and giving it fresh fuel.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then moving on to days 4 and 5, you should start to see some real action. The starter will get way more bubbly,
Okay.
and you should see it starting to double in size between feedings.
Yeah, that's a good visual cue.
It is. It's a really good sign that your colony of wild yeasts and bacteria are thriving.
So by day 5, you're hopefully seeing some serious activity.
Yes, you should be. And then by days 6 and 7, your starter should be consistently doubly in size within 4 to 6 hours after each feeding.
Wow.
It should also have a nice tangy aroma. Shouldn't smell bad or moldy.
Right, right.
And here's a great little test. You can do the float test.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about this.
Take a tiny spoonful of your starter and drop it gently into a glass of water. If it floats,
Uh-huh.
that's a really good sign that it's producing enough gas to make your bread rise.
Mm-hmm.
And it means it's probably ready to bake with.
So within about a week, maybe a bit longer, depending on different things,
Yeah.
you've gone from flour and water to this active, bubbly starter that's ready to go.
That's the basic idea.
Yeah.
But it's really important to remember that this timeline is just a general guide.
Okay.
It might take a bit longer depending on things like the temperature in your kitchen
Yeah.
and the specific types of microorganisms that are living in your local environment and in your flour.
Interesting.
It really does require observation, patience,
Yeah.
and that sort of culinary intuition that you mentioned.
Yeah.
You start to understand the rhythm of your starter.
So it's not just about, like, rigidly following a schedule. It's about learning to read the signs and responding to what you see.
Exactly. And that's the key takeaway here. Cultivating a sourdough starter, it's so much more than just a step in a baking recipe.
Yeah.
It's a connection to this long and fascinating culinary history,
Right.
a hands-on science experiment with fermentation.
Uh-huh.
And it's this really rewarding experience of nurturing something that's alive
Mm-hmm.
and will eventually create something delicious.
So sourdough, it's not just a fad. It's this living, breathing thing with roots that go back thousands of years.
You got it.
And it's all powered by this incredible microscopic world.
It is. And it really makes you think about the amazing diversity of those tiny organisms that are all around us all the time.
Yeah.
And this brings up a really interesting thought for you, the listener. Think about your own local environment, the unique wild yeasts and bacteria that are living in your specific area. How might those microbes influence your sourdough starter
Wow.
and ultimately the bread you bake?
Yeah.
Exploring those subtle variations could lead to some truly unique and personal results in your baking.
I love that idea that every loaf of bread could have a story about its own little corner of the world.
Exactly.
Well, this deep dive has definitely given us a lot to think about and a lot to digest in every sense of the word.
I hope so.
It feels like we've just barely scratched the surface of this amazing sourdough world.
Well, there's always more to discover.
That's for sure.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening to the deep dive.
Thanks, everyone.
We'll see you next time.
See you later.